Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast, where we tell inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. We started this podcast in November 2021, and we've had some amazing entrepreneurs on there since then. Episode 1 was with Jeff Cook, and Dave Schools, our founder, and a member of the founding team at Hopin, interviewed him. The most recent episode is me interviewing Zeeb Farben, who is the founder of Lightrix, a 2 billion rated unicorn. In this episode, I picked some of the best pieces of advice that we've seen in the previous episodes and chopped them down so they're easily digestible with all the best value just for you. So I hope you enjoy this episode. What we're going to start off with is, how did Entrepreneur's Handbook come about in the first place? And that's with my interview with Dave Schools in episode 3.
So I first heard about Ev Williams after college when I studied entrepreneurship and kind of got into the space then. And Ev Williams was someone that I really looked up to as the founder of Twitter and launching Blogger, and just kind of following his career. He was like the writer, philosopher meets entrepreneur founder, like tech founder, and brought those two personas together. So watching him leave Twitter and then start this new project called Medium, I was watching and waiting for when Medium opened its doors up for the first time ever. And Medium was founded in 2012 and opened its doors publicly for anyone to write in 2015. And I was ready and waiting when they issued that opening. So I started writing on Medium in 2015, and they initially launched with what they called collections, which we now know as publications, as just a way to organize your writing, like to put it in a place, for folks to peruse a collection around a topic. So I started I kind of openly wrote about my entrepreneurial adventures, like the early failed startups and projects that end up winding down, that we all have. But so I'd write about lessons learned from those and published them in a collection that I called Entrepreneur's Handbook. And it was early, it was one of the first publications, but it's since grown.
Yeah, and that's a bit of an understatement now, because it's got, I think, 210,000 followers the last time I checked.
I think so, yeah.
Right at that beginning stage, so what were some of your early startups that you were writing about? So people know you now for Hopin, but you've got a long history that goes way beyond that.
Sure, yeah. I remember one of them was Efographic. It was called efographic.com. And I borrowed, or rather my grandfather invested $5,000 in me to launch Efographic in my early 20s. And the concept, and even just re-describing it shows the holes in it. But it was basically a way to screenshot or snapshot your newsletters, email newsletters, such that they looked and felt like an infographic. And then it allowed you to make your infographic fit into a social media box, parameters, so that you could see the full infographic. So it's kind of like email newsletter to infographic, then infographic resizer to see everything in a social media post. And it was a tool that did that. So I launched it on Product Hunt and got a few thousand users. And the business model was folks would buy credits to use it. And it made zero money until 2 years later, when I had fully abandoned it but kept it open. Somebody bought $8 worth of credits on Efographic to change his UFO newsletter into something he could post on social media. And I just remember him reaching out on Facebook Messenger, and I had to reply, like, I'm sorry, this is not live anymore. I'll refund your money. And then I shut it down shortly after that.
One of the first parts of many entrepreneurs' journey is quitting their job. And I know for me, this was a very stressful experience, and it is for so many other people too. And maybe you're listening today and you want to become an entrepreneur, but you're scared about taking that leap. So in our bonus episode for Thanksgiving, Dave Schools asked Liz Willits this exact question. And Liz Willits is a LinkedIn thought leader with over 43,000 followers. You can hear her advice coming up.
Yeah, so I would say there's definitely been points where, the getting up to the moment where I quit was super stressful. because at that moment where I was making the move to quit, I had picked a date and then COVID hit. And so then I decided to wait a little bit. And then there were some internal things happening at the company I was working at that were kind of pushing me out the door. And then I got a job offer. And then I had been thinking about starting my own business. So I kind of had to make this decision between, I knew I didn't want to stay at my company, but it was between taking this other job offer or going out the door and, starting my own business. And so it was kind of the pressure of the situation that kicked me out the door. And that would be something I would advise people on, is like, you're always going to have fears that make you think that, now's not the time. And sometimes it's really good to have negative things happen that push you in a direction that you've been wanting to go. And so it was like not super negative things, but there were definitely things going on that pushed me in that direction. And then, that forced me to make a decision. So that's one thing I'd say. The other thing I would say is financially, I'd saved up a big runway, which removed a ton of stress. So I had I think about 9 months of savings. Whereas if I made zero money for 9 months, I would be okay. When I started my business. And that took off so much pressure, and it allowed me to only work with clients that I wanted to work with, because I think a challenge that agencies and consultants face is you need the money. And so you'll take anybody, and then you often get clients who make it really, really stressful for you and kind of ruin the experience. So that made it so much better for me, because I could be really picky and also kind of get the clients I needed to build my experience and my brand, and to say, hey, I worked at this company and that company. Mm-hmm. So that'd be another thing I'd say on that. And then, you're going to make mistakes, bad things will happen occasionally, and you're going to have off days, and you're going to face imposter syndrome. And just remember that is normal. Everyone faces that. I, for so long, was stopped from doing things because I'd be like, imposter syndrome, I just can't do this. And then what opened my eyes was realizing all of us, or almost all of us, face imposter syndrome. And that's not a reason not to do something.
100%. All of us do. That's for sure. One thing I remember when I was bringing in my folder, the orange folder, I remember the day I quit my job, and I had the orange folder in my hand with the letter that I was resigning. And I remember my heart beating so fast, walking into my boss's office and being like, what am I doing? What are you doing, Dave? You're quitting your job. But the two things, just to add to what you're saying, how do you know when to quit? The two things that come to mind for when I did was, I had a spouse who was working. And so that was the financial safety net. And then the second thing was the side projects that I have were gaining traction and growing. So there were signs of a project taking off. And actually it was Entrepreneur's Handbook. Okay. So there's kind of signs leading up to job quitting that you can kind of read before pulling the plug.
Yeah, and that was definitely true in my case too. I started posting pretty regularly on LinkedIn and starting to get requests for different projects and things. And so there's definitely some demand there.
Another major problem for many aspiring entrepreneurs is trying to decide exactly what they want to do and why they want to do it. They might know they want to have the freedom, they might know they want to build something, but trying to find that right product market fit can be very difficult. Pete Senna walks us through what he tells his clients about what they should do in entrepreneurship. Pete Senna himself has built an 8-figure marketing business.
When you can strike a balance of happiness and success, when you've defined what happy is for you, when you've defined what success is for you, and when you've been able to find that intersection, that's where sort of the real purpose gets unlocked. I always prescribe this Mark Twain quote, which is there's the two most important days in your life: the day you're born and the day you realize why. And I think that I have been blessed in that I've always had a passion for business, specifically design and tech and marketing. Not everyone has that passion. So if you tell someone to just chase what you're passionate about, that's frustrating advice. Because so what I tend to do now is I take a lot of my clients through exercises where I'll ask them a bunch of questions. So we have finding what you're really good at, what the world needs, what you love to do, what I like to call finding your intersect, right? When you find that intersect of where all those things come together, that's where things get lit up. So for me, that's the advice that I find that I try to do with all my clients that I coach, or in my advisory clients, is really finding out what they're here to do and why, their deeper why, and then connecting those dots to sort of send it forward. So that's what I would say shows up for me. That advice is universal. I apply that to every person I work with. More specifically, the advice that I've been going for a lot of my startup founders, that I do a lot of work in the direct-to-consumer space. So folks that are like launching businesses online, Instagram, TikTok, Shopify, etc. I recently worked with a client called Naboso. They're in the wellness space. They have an incredible proprioceptive technology that stimulates the brain through the feet and also now with the hands, because they have these sensory sticks. And it's just naboso.com. When we started working with the brand, the business, they were very, very small, still in the six figures a year in annual revenue. And now we've sort of like hockey sticked them to launching new products and launching new services. And I think ultimately the role that we played in that was helping to truly understand the picture and the vision in the head of the founder, and taking that picture and those raw ideas, getting them out of her head. She's a brilliant, amazing founder and CEO. Taking those ideas, packaging them, and then bringing them to the market in a way that mirrors her vision with what the customer's needs and wants are. And by needs and wants, I don't mean just articulated, but unarticulated as well. So a lot of times when you put something in the market, you're not putting something out that customers say they need, but your research and your intuition tells you the customers do need it. So I call that the unarticulated needs and wants. And in doing that, we saw hockey stick growth. So I think that really, said simply, it was about crafting a brand experience that connects the founder's vision to what the customers actually need. And then being the referee or the matchmaker in between those two things, it's a chaotic place, right? Being between a founder and a customer, because the customers can be voiceless or faceless if you don't know who you're going for. And the founder can have very strong opinions. But I'd say when you navigate those two things, that's a recent example I would give. You can check out their work online. We just launched a new amazing recovery sock product for them, where when you wear these socks, it helps you recover faster from any type of physical activity, whether you're on your feet or working out. I've personally benefited from the product, as has my family. So that's an example of just like cutting through the fat and the noise and really getting to that essence and getting to that core DNA. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of questions. It's a lot of hard conversations. But like anything, like the question you asked about leadership, it all starts from trust. It's approachability and trust. And from there, it goes from there. So I hope that answers the question. I was loving that one.
Now, just having an idea isn't actually how you become a successful entrepreneur at all. What really matters is execution. And not everybody can make a certain idea successful. And that's just the truth of life. Hassan Kuba, who's the author of the best-selling book, The Unfair Advantage, walks us through how you can find what your unfair advantages are and apply them to your business to see the results that you want to see.
Yeah, so unfair advantages are basically a competitive upper hand. They're like a head start in a race. One way to think about it is like competitive advantages in business. Warren Buffett doesn't invest in businesses that don't have deep and wide moat. Moat meaning like a castle, like a medieval castle. A moat protects it from its competitors. And basically, it's taking that concept of competitive advantage and taking it down to the individual. Because what we realized is for early stage startup founders, and they would come and pitch us, me and Ash, for funding. What we realized is when you're very early days, you don't have anything yet. You don't have a product built yet. You don't have customers yet. You don't have sales yet. So what is there to go on to know whether it's worth investing in? Well, people think it's all about the idea. And obviously idea matters, but we talk in the book, and this is a common kind of meme, is that ideas are overrated. It's all about the execution, really. But they do still matter. But then what you're left with? You're left with the people. You're left with the co-founders to the startup. And often that's one person. It's a solo founder. So it's like that one person. So it's taking the idea of competitive advantage and taking it down to the individual. So we call it your unfair advantage. So why is it unfair? It's unfair because it's sometimes not earned. It's something just been endowed, something to do with your circumstances. Or if it is something earned, let's say like expertise, you can earn your expertise in something. But that's built on a foundation of so many privileges and unfair advantages and luck that either way it's going to ultimately come down to how lucky am I to have this? How lucky am I to have fallen into this or learned about this? We developed this tool, as you said, called the MILES framework. It's to audit your own unfair advantages. And MILES is an acronym. And it breaks down the different types of unfair advantages there are. So the first thing that people usually think of when they think of unfair advantages is money. So money is there for M. Money is an unfair advantage. Like starting with zero, having to worry about paying bills, having dependents on you, wife, kids, elderly parents, I don't know, people who are sick in your family. These are all disadvantages that maybe if you're, like me, 20 years old or whatever, 20, how old was I? 23, 24, living with my parents in London, rent free. It's an unfair advantage, right? I didn't grow up with wealth, neither did Ash. And we talk about how they can be double-edged swords as well. But so money's there, right? Having a rich uncle, having rich parents, the bank of mum and dad, that's there. But then you also have I, which stands for intelligence and insight. And intelligence, we break down different types of intelligence. It's not just IQ, obviously. Insight is a big one. It's about how you come up with your idea. What unique insight do you have? Location and luck is the right place, right time. Education and expertise is all about the education you had, maybe the formal education or what you've taught yourself through experience and through applying and learning. And then you have finally S, which is for status, which is how you come across, how you're perceived. It's who you know as well, because you can raise your status by, oh yeah, I was having lunch with Elon Musk the other day. Okay, wow, your status just went up, right? And you also have inner status, which is your self-esteem and confidence.
So you've got your idea, you want to turn it into income. What's the best way to do this? So Jeff Cook, the founder of the Meet Group, walks us through his ideas of what you should do and his best advice.
Yeah. If you just go back to my own story, I guess, my first idea was, 1997, internet e-commerce, sell the only thing I knew how to do, which was write and edit. And so that was a really straightforward connection. I basically said, well, look, what can I do? Now, if I were to do something like that, there's a lot more competition. The internet isn't young, right? Like it's harder. But at least at that time, that I was very much just trying to take something I knew how to do and apply it. I would say, kind of going from idea to income, I generally now think about leverage, right? So like in the first example, the editing business or the writing business, unless I have a bunch of editors, and eventually I did. In the early days, though, I was doing all of the editing, writing. Obviously, that doesn't scale. You don't have any leverage. You need to make money essentially when you're sleeping, right? Like people have to be able to use your products all the time, and so I think that's why I think you see so many network effects businesses, right? Because if you can, now I would think of idea to money in the pocket. I probably don't think about necessarily, if I'm trying to start something new, like how is this going to make money right now? Like there's certain contexts where I do think that's really important, but in a networks effects business, it's not really that important, right? Like the first thing is, can you get, in the case of my yearbook, can you get enough people on the network to have anything there that where they can meet each other? And if you can, then there's value from the network effect, because the more people that come in, there's more people to meet, creating more value. And then you could always potentially find ads, subscription, IAPs, some way of monetizing them. But the fundamental problem is, can you amass them? And so I guess for a service business, it's a little more direct, but idea to income, then when you're like a platform as a service play or a SaaS play, there are cases where I think first about the income, right? So it's like, okay, I have this thing, I have this distribution point, I'm able to reach these companies that we serve with our SDKs. I know that they don't particularly care about what my next engagement feature is. What they probably care more about is if they can get an extra $10,000 a day by flipping a switch, because everybody will try that, right? And so, there I'm thinking more like, well, how do I create an experience that's going to not only engage but monetize, because I know that's the only way I'll get the distribution I need, and I've built in distribution because of the SDK relationship. So I think as far as going from kind of an idea to income, I think you have to know where the future income is that you're trying to get. And in the case of consumer social, you're probably best off not worrying too much about the income up front, and just trying to build network scale
That reminds me of
things, right? It's
the
different.
question that we asked at Hoppin in the earlier days, or at least last year, was in making a strategic decision, are we optimizing for growth or for revenue? And
Right.
to your point, in the early days of a flywheel effect, viral growth product, optimizing for growth was always the answer.
Always, right? Because once you start optimizing for EBITDA, you're going to have an EBITDA multiple valuation, right? And so you better be sure that's what you want, because that's a much harder business, right? Like that's a real business, first of all,
Right.
but it's you're going to go from nosebleed multiples on a growth story. But again, if all you have at the end of the day, the growth story, then obviously there's a point at which
Yeah.
it probably slows, and then you do have to envision what your business is really going to be when that slows.
Yep.
But if you could keep kicking that down the line because you're growing so fast, that's what you'd like to do.
Dave asked the same question to Sarah Downey, who's an accomplice venture capitalist. Here's her response.
I think just doing it sounds trite, but it's important. Too many people get hung up on, okay, I need to do this the right way. I have to plan every aspect of this before I actually do it. People are afraid to fail. I think you just have to try it. For example, let's say you have an idea that, I don't know, like I was talking to my friend recently and she hosts Airbnbs. Like she realized that she's very good at doing this. Like she has been doing this for a while. She's figured out how to make a very good second income stream from it. She knows the ins and outs of like what gets high ratings. And she was like, you know what, maybe I should just like make an online course about this. And maybe I could also at the beginning or end of the course link to my referral code so that if new hosts start because of me, I'll get a piece of that. And she was asking me like, well, do you think I should do this or what should I try? And I'm like, just fucking do it. Like you already know, you have the information, you've done the hard part, you've thought about it, you've lived this. Get on Teachable, like just do it. What's the worst thing that can happen is you don't get an audience for it, or maybe you don't get an audience for it at first, but you figure that out later. Like I think it's like the muscle memory of actually doing the thing and not just thinking about it or talking about it, and being willing to take a risk and being willing to fail. And even for like a couple dollars just to start getting a signal about, is this something people will pay for or not? Like throw up a landing page and just get some emails and reach out to those people and do some product exploration.
100%. One of the quotes that changed my life probably 4 years ago was this random anonymous quote I read on Reddit that said, it was something that like, you learn more in 3 days of taking action than in 6 months of researching.
I could not agree more. It's like the just do it attitude.
Yeah. And once you start seeing like the Stripe emails, like, hey, deposit it available in your account, that's where the light bulb, like the fire starts for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are afraid to ask people for money. And I understand it. I mean, I'm a VC and an angel investor, so people ask me for money all the time, and I find it hard to do that. Whether it's asking a customer to pay you for something, like a lot of people I think have trouble putting value on themselves or the stuff that they put out into the world. And especially because, since the 90s, kind of too much has been free. Like we went too far in that direction with the advertising business model and social media and everything. And I think people need to have boundaries and have a sense of self-worth and stand by that. Like your time is valuable. You need to stick by it and tell people, learn the value of the word no, and figure out how to ask for compensation in a way that's reasonable.
100%. One of the biggest problems, to your point, of people being kind of afraid to ask for money is also when they ask for money, they don't ask for enough. Like they underprice themselves incredibly. I see this all the time with hourly rates, where it's like, oh, I'm not worth that much for this, and this reason. Where it's like, no, value-based pricing. Like look at what your work is going to accomplish for your client. You should charge for an hourly rate that justifies that.
Exactly. I think the only exception to that is if you're trying to get in the door somewhere where you know that you have a big ability to escalate the amount that you're worth. Like when I applied to that job off Craigslist at that consumer privacy startup, like I had a law degree and I billed myself at $20 an hour. And I later learned that I was by far the cheapest person, but I later got up to a pretty good salary. But I just knew I had to get my foot in the door because I knew I could do a good job at this place. But otherwise, I think you're 100% right with that.
I remember like the moment that I graduated from like low hourly rate to higher to the 6-figure hourly rate, the first moment that happened, I didn't even ask for it. There was a CEO who was kind enough to just say, hey, I want you to ghostwrite for me. You're going to write this article. I'm going to pay you $100 an hour and you're going to start next week. And I was just like, and I was currently making, I think, $55 an hour at that time. So he said that, I was like, yes. I will be doing that. Yeah, I think it's nice when someone in your life sees the potential in you that you don't even see necessarily. Like there have been a couple people like that in my life who were instrumental, and it really does change the whole trajectory of your life when someone sees that value in you, because it is tough to put a number on your output or your time. And you are right. People tend to undervalue it, right? It's like it feels egotistical or a little bit icky to put out a number that's very high, but most people just completely undercut it.
One of the things that many people forget is that even Mark Zuckerberg, even Jeff Bezos, even Elon Musk, they all started from somewhere. They all had to build their businesses from 1 employee to 10 employees, then to 100 employees. And this initial phase can be really difficult and really stressful for many people. Prakalpa, the founder of Atlan, which is used by massive global giants such as Postman and Unilever, talks us through how this process was like for her after going into entrepreneurship straight after university.
It was hard. The first 12 months was definitely hard, right? Because we had never hired anybody. We had never had anyone work for us. We'd never been a manager. And I do think we made mistakes. I think we hired the wrong people. We made several hiring mistakes because back then we were just like, anyone who potentially, agreed to work with us, that was such a thing, right? Like, why would people come work with us? We didn't have credibility or any of those things back then. And I think we learned from some of those mistakes. We also were very fortunate that there are some people that found us, like our first and second engineer. There are engineering leaders today at Atlan. We've been working together for 8 years, 9 years now. And so we also found some people who grew with us, who took a bet and grew with us. And those are people that I'm incredibly thankful to. But we made a ton of mistakes back then. There's some things that I think the one thing that I've learned is though, keep the bar high, no matter where you are in your life. Like there was a moment when I think we got to this point where, we felt, oh my God, we've never done this before. And we don't know how we're going to do it. And we don't have the experience. And we have to go hire all these experienced people. And then we hired people for their experience. And then we realized that actually they weren't as good as we thought they would be. And I think the one thing that everyone or that I take away today is that every company is different. Every company is unique. Nobody can take a playbook that they built somewhere else and come and make that work in your company. And so you need to build a playbook that works for you. You need to hire people that work for you. You need to hire people for your standards. And so the one thing that we have taken away, for example, our culture is very, we have this value we call one team. And our culture is sort of built around this thing on saying, nothing should matter except the outcome of someone's work. And that means you take away all the labels. For example, this could be pedigree, this could be age, this could be experience levels, this could be gender, this could be, any potential label that you can look at goes away. And so we've created a hiring process and an interview process that tests for that, right? For example, we have this phase that we call a challenge phase. And the challenge is a real life problem statement that you take on before working today at Atlan, right? And it is an intensive process. You sometimes are, we expect people to spend over 2 days on that challenge. And people drop off. The reality is that people drop off in that process. And, sometimes we've had very experienced, great candidates with great, sort of backgrounds who said, really, you want me to do this? And the thing that was really important to us was that actually, but if you are going to come and be a leader at Atlan, you have to believe in our values. And our values are that you have to show through your outcomes and not through conversations, right? And we expect you to do that. And so if you cannot believe at that level, if you think about your life, like, 1.5 to 2 days is, you're making a decision about where you want to go spend the next 3 or 4 years of your life. If you are not ready to invest 2 days into that process, then maybe you're not the right person for us as well, right? And so that's been hard. It's been hard to stick to that. But what it's helped us do is that when we bring people in, we are able to create a culture which is truly sort of a meritocracy. I think that is worked well. So I think just learning what matters to you and what your culture stands for, and then building the process for that has been the one thing that I've learned a lot as an entrepreneur.
Once you've got your idea sorted, you now need to work out how you're going to market your business and how to grow as a thought leader to attract people to come to work for you and for people to invest in you. We return to Liz Willetts, who tells us how she managed to grow to 43,000 followers on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so when I initially started posting on LinkedIn, it was really, I'm sure, really dumb posts. I haven't gone back to those in a long time, but no strategy behind it. And I think starting to get that a little initial traction at first kind of was like, oh, like maybe I can do something with this. But then I had one post that I remember kind of went, I won't say viral, but sort of for LinkedIn viral. Like I'd never had a post with thousands of likes. And so one of my posts got to that point, and I had just basically been talking about a frustration in my job. So I worked at Aweber at the time. We were an email marketing platform, and something people would say all the time is email marketing is dead. And so I posted this post that was like, coffee is dead. Nobody likes it. Nobody drinks it. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then I was like, well, isn't this ridiculous? Like everybody loves coffee. And then I said, oh, that's the same when people say email marketing is dead. And the reason I went with the coffee approach was because I was like, okay, that's a good hook. It's going to grab people's attention. Everyone has strong feelings on coffee, and to say it's dead it's just kind of ridiculous. And so with the usage of email marketing among businesses, saying it's dead is ridiculous. And so I had that success of that post going somewhat viral. And then I got really hooked into it and started posting every day.
Mm-hmm. I had one LinkedIn post go viral as well. It was actually the one where I quit my job. And what's funny is I did it experimentally, as it was Josh Fetcher had a formula for a viral LinkedIn post, and I just put my story into it and followed it.
Awesome.
And then the next thing I know, it was republished by CNBC, and it got over 3 million views. That was many years ago. That was 5 years ago now. Okay. And your post, like that happens like left and right. I was just seeing one the other day, had like 85,000 likes or reactions on it. Yeah, that was another one. I've had a few that reached a few 100 million, I think, and that was one. The viral posts don't happen every day, so I don't want to get people's expectations up that you're going to have viral posts every day. But when you start posting on LinkedIn regularly, you're going to have a one that hits every now and again. Yeah. Like, can you control it, or can you tell like, oh, this one probably will, or like, I'm curious. Virality is something like nobody controls, but I mean, you're getting pretty regular at it. Yeah, your hook. The first line of your copy is absolutely integral. And then I would say like the things that tend to go viral are really heartwarming, or they're like huge frustrations that people deal with. So typically when I have had a post of a good hook that is, in my case, on a frustration, or it could be a heartwarming kind of situation in my career, but usually a frustration, then it goes somewhat viral. And so that's like when it comes to writing content that really resonates with people, it's about understanding their emotions enough that you can tap into them and kind of have like build this empathy with them. And so frustrations, if you're feeling a frustration in your role, likely there are thousands of other people's feeling that frustration. And if you can talk about that succinctly and well in a post and make a person feel less alone because they realize, hey, I'm not the only one dealing with this, that can be really powerful. That reminds me really quick. I was at a conference, and Tim Urban from waitbutwhy.com was speaking, and he said something that stuck with me and influences the way I write, and it kind of is similar to what you're saying. Is he says he writes for a million Tims, in the sense like when he writes his own story and like what he's going through, there's a million other folks just like him. So you kind of like write for the audience of yourself, knowing that there's a million other Liz's and Daves. So
that's so true. And I think our tendency is to say, it's just me. I'm the only one who feels this way. And unless you're like a psychopath or like some kind of, oddball person, that's just untrue. There are hundreds of thousands of other people who are thinking the same way and dealing with the same issues. And one of the easiest ways to start seeing success on social media or anywhere is just to share content that helps solve the problems that you faced or are facing, or the ones you've conquered already, and showing people how you conquered it. And it's that simple.
Yeah, 100%. What's your process look like? Like so much of this comes down to ideas, like the ideas that you get for a post. How do you come up with great ideas, and how do you track and polish, and do you have a system for that?
Yeah, and it's gotten more sophisticated as time has gone on. So my one tip, or the one systematic thing I always do, is if I have an idea, I write it down immediately. And it could be like a crap idea. It could be what I think is a brilliant idea. And like, workout thoughts, shower thoughts, like all of it, you write it down. And so I use notes on my iPhone, and then I have a Notion page where I store a list of a bunch of ideas, and then what social platforms I think they could go on. I mostly post on LinkedIn, and it'll start perhaps as a really unrefined idea, and I might not use it for months, and then I might come back to it later and use it. The hardest thing to do is to sit down on a day and be like, hey, I'm going to write some posts, and you have nothing to start with. So that'd be one thing I'd say, write it down if it pops into your head. Another way to get ideas is through your work. Anything that goes well, didn't go well, anything you're thinking about throughout the day, write those down. Scroll through social media feeds to get ideas. That's something I do too. When I'm looking for ideas to jot down, I'll scroll through LinkedIn and Twitter, see what someone else is talking about, and think about like, oh, not how can I copy that, but how can I add on to this conversation? Or what's my unique perspective on this conversation? Because you're right, idea generation is challenging, and you can't just pull it out of thin air. It helps also to have like content pillars. So these are the 7 different topics that I talk about on LinkedIn, and you organize things that way, and then you sit there and you brainstorm and brain dump everything that could go into your content pillar, and then you have a list of ideas that way too. So writing down ideas is really important. I like to batch my LinkedIn writing. Now, I'm not always perfect at this, but it's best to have a few hour period to write a bunch of posts at once, rather than to sit down every morning and try to write a post.
I'm curious, how do you think about the kind of going out of your lane? Some people, you're a multifaceted person, with different interests. But then if you want to, it seems the common advice out there is that if you want to, develop a following, you stay focused in one lane. What's your opinion on having multiple lanes, kind of sharing whatever you're interested in versus maintaining a focus on one topic for developing a following?
Yeah, there are people who do this. There are multiple people who do this different ways, right? For me, I would say I have 3 or 4 different topics that I talk about on LinkedIn. And then there are some people, other copywriters who talk just copywriting. And I think both can be successful depending on how you want to build your thought leadership. And I definitely debated with myself at times, should I be more focused just on copywriting? But I also for me, writing on LinkedIn is about, it's a passion in a way. And, I love doing it. And also it's about sharing information and helping people. And sometimes the information I have to share isn't just in the copywriting lane. And so I'm not going to sit on that because it's not in my specific little content lane. And I also think there's, I've been a content creator for years, and we would talk about at companies where, we'd have this one topic we'd talk about, but there's so much you can talk about within your one topic that you can relate back to that topic. So for instance, I'm a professional copywriter and marketer, but a lot of, entrepreneurship kind of topics relate back to what I do because I'm also an entrepreneur. So I don't know, that's kind of a rambling way of saying it, but
I should try and pick out those 4 things. You said you have 4 things that you focus on based on me following you. I should be able to name what those 4 things are. So here it goes: email marketing, copywriting, remote work. I think from there, I'm a little fuzzy on what the others could be.
Yeah, it's, I would say entrepreneurship, content marketing, email. Well, I consider content marketing within email marketing. So I consider this one. So entrepreneurship, content marketing, email marketing, copywriting, and then career, I would say are the 4. Career is super broad. So that allows me just to talk about everything. That's my, one category that is my cheat category. Oh, I can talk about anything now.
Love it.
Now, this is one of my personal favorite pieces of advice that's come on this podcast, and it's from our founder, Dave Schools. And he talks us through the idea of roadmap marketing and how you can use this technique to grow a startup fast. And he's used it for 3 of his startups himself. Yeah,
it's an interesting question. How you formulate the offering and position it in the marketing, there's a certain amount of guesswork that goes into that. And at Hopin, we've moved so fast. We don't have decades of data to make decisions off of. And that's been something that we're working on actively now, is improving our data systems for that kind of decision-making capability. But in the meantime, and in a fast-moving early-stage startup, you don't have the data to have a clear right answer. And so what you just have to push out. You have to put it in front of real customers and get feedback and validation. And then that's how you start developing your pricing plans and your ICP. And so one thing, I'll give a specific example of a strategy that I'm seeing used 3 times in a row at Hopin. I'd recommend anyone who's launching a product to follow this. Product roadmap can be like, how do you determine the features you build for your product? There's different opinions, and this might be, controversial, but it's just the way I've seen. Build, your core product to solve the problem. As you get users coming in and they become customers, especially, your highest paying ones, or, ones that you want to replicate the deal of, that's where you ask them, have a close relationship with those customers and ask them, like, what could we build that would help you achieve your goals? Or if it's a prospect who says, if you build this feature, I will sign the contract. So in the early days of Hopin, we never said no. We built the feature that Wall Street Journal needed, that TechCrunch Disrupt needed, that the Atlantic needed. And we didn't say, no, we don't have that. We said, yep, we'll have it well before your event. And so that's kind of, so the takeaway, I guess, is that, and this is the same with StreamYard Business, is that you determine what you build based on the logo you can bring in that you then can put on your website. And you have a case study, and then you have word of mouth and like FOMO coming from like their peers when you get that big logo coming in. So that's like one kind of practical takeaway for how to scale a startup, is build features for logos to come in the door and then partner with them to do customer marketing.
Yeah, and I think you've called this roadmap marketing before, right?
Roadmap marketing, yeah.
Once you're starting to see a bit of success, what you need to do is make sure that you guard against your ego and against hubris. Regina Joseph, one of the world's only super forecasters, tells us what mistakes she often sees in decision making and how you can avoid them.
One of the first and biggest mistakes is that they don't have a process, right? They're just winging it. They think that they have a system, but they don't really have a system. So that's mistake number one. You really should have a plan. And most people, even when they think they have a plan, don't really have a plan. Even if it's, they're using like a lean business plan form and things like, yes, okay, that's a plan for your business plan, but it's not a plan or a strategy for anticipating how your decisions are going to generate outputs and what kinds of outputs are you expecting. So first mistake is usually there's no high quality process or system used in the decision-making environment. The second is usually that people just don't know how to formulate the questions very well, right? If you're trying to come up with a solution, what you're basically doing is you're trying to deliver some kind of an answer to a question. But most people begin with the answer and not the question. And so the question really should guide the answer. And that's the second mistake, that I commonly see. To a great degree, I understand why this is a very common mistake, because there are plenty of funding venues that are perfectly happy, to entertain your answer without themselves asking the question as well. Or they think that they're asking the question, but they're not really asking the right question. And that is why we have, a lot of money going into companies that should never have been funded in the first place. You look at something like WeWork, the debacle of WeWork. I mean, I think that at least now there's able management trying to push that back into a money-making enterprise. The emperor has no clothes. Who's spotting that? Is it really so much so that people are so enamored, with the charisma factor that they're not asking the simple question of, does the world need another real estate investment trust, when you have major cities with a lot of excess office space? Is that what the market wants? Which would have been the appropriate question. And is it a resilient business to start off with? So I think that's a clear example of, I see a lot of businesses start, and they get the money, and they still get the money. So, and that's the caprice, of the world that we live in, right? You might even still be asking the right questions. That sets up for the third bit, which is, be prepared to be persistent and patient, and it will be a challenge no matter how much you prepare. So that is definitely I think the important takeaway for anybody who wants to become an entrepreneur.
Now, it can be difficult to choose what's the right projects that you should be working with. We return to Pete Senna, who talks us through his 4 green lights process, and this determines what direction his company goes into.
Another core value is what we call care greatly. So care greatly is a really important value. We have an internal metric of success that we use. So I'm really big into KPIs, or key performance indicators. We recently, we had lots of KPIs over the years, been around for over 16 years. And one of the most successful KPI frameworks we ever rolled out was one that we came up with internally called the 4 green lights. And the 4 green lights drive everything we do. So that core value of care greatly. So there's 4 green lights. The first is team satisfaction. Is the team happy, whole in the process, right? Happy, whole, healthy. Are they able to put their family first? That's really, really critical. We walk that walk. We've fired clients. We just fired a client this week as a result of it because it was affecting team sat. So our rule is, if you can't get 4 green lights, we don't work with that client. Doesn't matter. First is team satisfaction. Second is client satisfaction. Can we ultimately deliver and make that client happy, right? Third is the impact of the work. Will working with us help that client achieve their result or move the needle for the client? And then fourth is profitability. And the reason I put profitability last is because profit is not a goal, it is a result. If profit is your goal, I worry about you as a company and your core values. Again, great companies are profitable, but they don't focus on profitability. They focus on success with their teams and with their customers. So that care greatly thing means caring greatly about yourself, your team, and your clients. So care greatly is a very important core value. Our third core value is all about being responsive to change. So we have literally obviously we're a remote first company now because of the pandemic, but we still have a beautiful, amazing office space. We actually own a tech campus in New Haven, Connecticut, where our headquarters is based out of. And in one of the large spaces, sandblasted into the brick on the wall is a big quote, which is a big part of our culture, which is change is the only constant. You'll see that on the walls. You'll see that in certain publications that we print on. And the third core value around that is adapt and respond. The market is moving faster than it ever has. The world is changing at a rapid pace. I think one of the reasons that we stood up to COVID and were able to get through it and really thriving, having one of our best years ever, really comes down to the fact that we adapted and responded to the market, to the world. So that third core value is, are you responsive to change, right? It's super, super important. And the last core value, sort of taking a page out of the Matrix, which I'm so excited that they're launching the new one this month. Hopefully it doesn't suck. The core value we use on the website is actually a picture of a bent spoon, which is a kind of a throwback to the Matrix. And the fourth core value is simply believe. And simply believe is that what I've seen energetically, I'm a big meditator. You can see sort of some of the stuff in the background here, is we can manifest things as people if we believe in it. So if you know, the Henry Ford quote that I always reference in a lot of my talks is, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So what I like to say is, if we believe in each other, if we believe in our client, if we believe in what we're doing, we can win. Now, that might sound a little bit lofty for those of you that don't know who I am. You're listening to this now or later in the future. The true reality is, when we follow these core values, when we can get to 4 green lights, we're doing some amazing breakthrough work for great clients. And what I'll tell you is, I've been doing this for 16 years. I have fucked up a ton. I've made a million mistakes. And I think most of my mistakes came down to not listening enough, not trusting my instincts, and ultimately doing something that didn't have all 4 green lights. And again, it took me way too long to get to those 4 green lights. I think if we established that our first few years in business, I think our growth would have been a lot more of a hockey stick than it ultimately was. So if you're listening to this now, whether you're just starting your business tomorrow or you've been in your business like me for over 16 years, I'd say one thing's true. Know your values, know your principles, know what you stand for, know what you don't stand for, and lean into that and lead that way. And that's, I think, will ultimately lead to your success.
Now, at Entrepreneur's Handbook, we believe that creators are their own entrepreneurs too, and they're trying to build their own businesses, even if it's a business of one. Now, Zeev Farben, who's the CEO of Lightrix, the company behind the massively popular apps such as Facetune and FilterTune, talks us through where he sees the creator economy going in the future.
So like these days I spend kind of a lot of time to figure out what's around Web3 is a buzzword and what might become kind of a real kind of mass market technology. And the theme that I kind of really like there is the whole story of decentralization. In some sense, you can claim that kind of modern platforms, when you think about kind of the big ones, they, in a sense, almost like captured the internet, right? Like there's like this venture capitalist that sent me the study that they did around what happens to each dollar that invested in startups, kind of in general, right? And then it's kind of crazy. You see that its dollar is basically like a big chunk of it goes to the platform, right? And I think like decentralization, in a sense, that's, and again, like the transparency, that's kind of a big part of the themes of Web3, like just the way I see it. It almost takes us back to like Web 1 in the sense, okay, where Web was like this kind of more open place, more kind of transparent place, kind of also maybe more of the Wild West that's probably not going to come back because obviously like regulators these days care way more about the web. And there I also kind of see the promise for creators, right? Because if a lot of the infrastructure of the social media networks is becoming commodity, then again, like the content is becoming the king. If there is the kind of a good infrastructure kind of to create kind of ad hoc communities, to collaborate, okay, to in a way that again it's transparent, that you know exactly like who are collaborators on the project, etc., kind of shared in a way that kind of doesn't require kind of one centralized platform. I think there is a big promise there for creators as well. And we just like see that they're actively looking for it, right? Like I kind of, when we talk with our creators, a lot of their kind of concerns around the fact of how, from their perspectives, platforms are rigging the game, right? What they're basically saying is that, listen, we build the following on like this or that platform, okay? We build this following by kind of a lot of hard work, but creating kind of high quality content. And then the platform decide to tweak its algorithm, and then even in order to reach our users, we need to kind of to work extra, right? Which, like really, when you think about it, again, it's a great business model for the platforms. It's not so great for creators. And what we're kind of trying to figure out is where Web3 can be helpful for our creators in around like these themes of kind kind of decentralization, transparency, kind of sharing that doesn't require kind of centralized systems.
The future is terribly hard to predict. So what we have now is the super forecaster, Regina Joseph, telling us what you can do when you have an idea and you're not sure how it's going to work out, the business model might be incorrect, but you've got this idea and you think it's the future. What should you do?
Well, I think we touched on it a bit earlier in our conversation, where I think that persistence and patience are probably uppermost. Everything that I anticipated that would happen with Blender in terms of how it would work as a business was, completely turned upside down. Even though I knew that it was viable as a business, there are, again, many other moving parts that you cannot necessarily predict. Like, is somebody going to screw you on a deal? Is somebody going to, is a major advertiser going to fall out or suddenly appear? So there are lots of different, does the technology change? Does your distribution partner, is your distribution partner viable, not viable? There were so many ifs back then because, I was literally creating it from zero. There was nothing that existed before it. So there were no roadmaps. And so being able to extrapolate from a past base rate wasn't really available to me. So the typical types of statistical methods that I would use as a quantified forecaster today, in terms of applying that, from a strategic foresight perspective back then, in a lot of the stuff, if I'm doing geopolitical analysis or analysis around public health or et cetera, there are base rates I can work with. There's prior history that I'm able to use in order to be able to guide my analyses. In terms of building out something like Blender or Engine or all of the other stuff that I did with Liberty Global and Cello and Sony, no, all of that I was trying to invent from zero. And so in those kinds of conditions, it will take longer than you expect. It won't happen the way you expect it will. There will be constant roadblocks and impediments thrown in your way. And part of your success is dependent upon whether or not you have set for yourself the threshold of what you're willing to live with, what you're not willing to live with. If you want to make it happen, then you have to be prepared to live with a lot. You are going to face a lot of challenges, but that's what you have to sort of seal yourself up for. That's the bargain. All decision-making is trade-offs, endless trade-offs. Part of the process of working through a trade-off is, you have to know what you're willing to give up in order to get, something on the other end. So I would say that those really are, what's the trade-off you're willing to live with? I think especially now that, certainly back when I was starting Blender, and even up until quite recently, nobody was really interested in mental health issues. Nobody was talking about, and even now I think that there's still a culture, there's still very much a culture of, have to look insanely busy and, mental health is for wimps kind of attitude. I think that is still very much true now in some circles, but it's also true that there is an increasing focus on that. And so I think that as an entrepreneur, I think that when you are articulating what the trade-off you're willing to live with is, back when I was starting Blender, that was not part of the trade-off I was thinking about. I think today it certainly is. And again, there are lots of demographic differences between what my generation would define as a trade-off versus what, a millennial or a Generation Z cohort, how they would view the trade-offs. Completely different, I think.
And our final clip for today is a beautiful note from Prokapa, the founder of Atlan, to tell us what's the real meaning behind entrepreneurship. The end goal can't be selfish, because at the end of the day, it's a service job and you're changing the world if you do it right.
That's a great question. I think I'm still on that journey. I will know. At this point, the one thing that I have learned, and I think people get this wrong about entrepreneurship a lot, everybody thinks it's a way for you to do what you want to do. So, sometimes I hear people say, I want to be an entrepreneur because I don't want to work for anybody else. And I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're working for someone else, you can tell your boss that you want a day off, or you can check out. You can say that somebody else is looking out for you. That doesn't happen as an entrepreneur, right? You are working for everybody. I think of it as a service job. You are responsible to your team. You are responsible to your investors. You are responsible to your customers. It's a lot of responsibility. And so I think the reason you do it cannot be because of what you want to do. The reason you do it needs to be about what you want to create or what impact you have in the world. Because if it comes down to what you want to do, there's a ton of things that you're probably going to have to do that you don't want to do. And that's just the reality of being an entrepreneur, right? And so I think today, for me, I think I do what I do because of what I believe in, which is what I believe data teams can do in the world. Frankly, as we grow and scale the company, I would like to do what is best for the company at every stage of the life cycle. I think once you start looking at it from that lens, and some of our founding team members look at it from that lens too, and I think they've been the best, right? Sometimes I have people, and you have different kinds of team members all the time, right? But there's some that are very personally driven. It's about I want to get here. These are my career goals. This is what I want to get to 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And that's okay. Some of them are very driven and they contribute a ton to the company. But the best shift happens when it stops being about you and it starts being about the company and the mission. And in fact, I've seen that when that shift happens, those are the people that grow the fastest. And those are the people that, because it is always harder to push yourself for yourself. It is far easier to push yourself for a larger cause or for someone else. And so when that shift happens in people's heads, I think that's when I've seen the maximum growth happen as well for people. And so, something I've embraced, but I've also seen it when other people embrace, it has done a world of good to them.
Thank you everybody for listening. I hope you have a wonderful new year and meet all your goals for 2022. Talk to you again soon.